Good evening, everybody. Excuse me for being a little bit late. As you can see, I'm suffering some sort of a nosebleed. I've been for the afternoon, but it's under control at the moment, so we can carry on. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive Scrutiny Board on the 13th of January, here in the Council Chamber at Derby. Go through the agenda firstly, and the apologies, please, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I've got apologies from Councillors Eyre, Rawson, and I believe, is it Mulhall?
Councillor Mulhall, yes. Okay, I don't believe there are any late items.
No.
Declarations of interest, please. No? Good. All right, then we're one item agenda tonight, and that's in relation to the budget proposals for 25-26 through to 27-28. And Alison's joined us at the top table here. I think you've got some slides to lead us in to the district. Welcome to the Leader of the Council and Cabinet members. Great to see you here.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Right, good evening everyone. I've got a few slides just to support the scrutiny tonight. I think what I propose to do is just go through some of the headlines and pick some key bits out of the budget report, and then we will focus on directorate by directorate in terms of just some headline information, introduction from the officers, and then the questioning by directorate. I just think that's probably easier to structure it that way. So if that's okay with all of you, that's how we progress. Thank you. So what I wanted to do first of all really was just give you some context to where we were since we've issued the budget report. So we issued the budget report in December, but since then we've had the provisional local government finance settlement. So I just thought it was probably worthy of giving Scrutiny Board an update of what the implications of that finance settlement were. So in terms of the headline figures, we can see there from our core spending power that we've got a £22.6 million increase for 25-26 as compared to 24-25. And what the core spending power does is that measures the revenue funding available to local government. That does include direct grants from central government, but also it makes assumptions around council tax increases as well. You can see there in comparison, future years core spending power, 22.6 million is probably on the upper end, but isn't out of the ordinary what we've seen in recent years, particularly as adult social care funding had been earmarked in previous years for local government. So that sort of gives you the context of the increases that we've got available to us. When we set the budget when the budget report was written in December, we made some assumptions around what that increase will be. And they've already been factored into the budget report, and that's enabled us to invest around about over 30 million into services. So we'd already made some assumptions around those increases. However, this finance settlement has probably been one of the biggest changes that we've seen over recent years, particularly as it's been the first budget of the new government. Quite a few changes have been made in it, and some of those assumptions that we assumed in the budget have varied. So, if in terms of just giving you some analysis of what that variation is, apologies for the detail on this slide, but if you cast your eye down to the bottom of the slide, you can see there a comparison of what our draft MTFP assumed in terms of our funding streams and what the provisional settlement has given us, and that's around about an additional funding of around £3.7 million. The majority of that additional funding is in relation to the recovery grant. So the recovery grant is a new grant that's been established and I suppose it is what it says. It's a recovery grant for local government. It was around about 700 million nationally. When we set the budget, though, we didn't know the distribution of that grant. The methodology hadn't been issued. And what we did know was that it was going to be targeted towards councils with high deprivation and low council tax base. That we did know. And we were fortunate enough to get round about just over £6 million worth of that national total for the recovery grant. Our estimations at the point that we set the budget is we assumed that we'd get about 3.2 million from the methodology that we could glean from. So that was quite a big windfall for us, around about £3.4 million more in funding than we'd assumed in the budget report, and that accounts really for the majority of the 3.7 million additional funding. What we don't know about the recovery grant, though, is that what the permanent nature of that recovery grant will be, or what the future distribution of it will be. It's quite evident that will feature in future funding settlements, but as it moves from a specific grant with individual criteria and methodology for its allocation, as it moves into mainstream funding, the distribution of that could change. So that's sort of a risk factor with us in terms of future budget. How permanent is that funding, and what are we likely to get in future years? So we have to be really careful around the use and investment of that monies if we can't rely on it in future years. Just to sort of recap some of the main points within the budget report. The budget that we're at consultation on, that you're considering tonight, is a balanced budget for 1 year only. So you can see there for 25-26 at the top half of that table, you can see we've got a balanced position for 25-26 in terms of the proposals. But for 26-27 on to 27-28, we've got a gap that rises to £9.8 million. So it is a 1 year balanced budget at this point in time. Now, obviously, that's not a favourable situation to be in. We would like to be in a position where we could balance the budget over the medium term. That will aid financial sustainability of the council. However, at this point in time, with the budget report that we've gone out with, that's the position that we're facing as part of that pre-settlement assumptions around the finances. The second part of the table just gives a summary of what some of the headlines are in terms of pressures and savings contained within the budget report. So to achieve a balanced budget for next year, we need to deliver just over £10 million worth of savings next financial year, and they're the savings that are detailed in the report that you've had for consideration. As part of delivering of those £10 million savings, we've also got a pressures that are included in the report of £31.3 million. And that table there just shows you the movement between those pressures when we set the indicative budget last year and where we are this year. So we've seen pressures from our indicative budget of 14 million rising to 31 million. So there's proposals for investment into service budgets of 31 million. Now they come from an array of things. They're all detailed within the budget report, but I suppose that they will come from some of the pressures that we've seen this financial year also. When we're reporting some of the overspends that we've got this financial year, we've got significant pressures in demand services for adult social care. We've got rising costs of inflation, and we've also got quite significant demand pressures within our housing budgets around use of temporary accommodation. And I did bring to scrutiny some of the strategies that we've got in place when we talk about what the delivery board and what some of the proposals are for delivering some of those budget pressures going forward. That's quite a significant amount, £31 million worth of pressures. In context, it's usually around about early 20s, so we are seeing a big hike in some of those pressures that we're having to deal with as part of the budget proposals. Okay, so the budget report also proposes replenishment of our reserves. So our reserves are quite critically low for the council, with an overspend forecast at Q2, which we were forecasting circa sort of £9 million overspend. That would be a call on our general fund reserves, and our general fund reserves would fall to a critical low balance of round about £5 million. We've got a strategy over the next 3 years to replenish those reserves, and as part of the budget report in front of you, we are proposing that we will put an additional £5.8 million into general fund and budget risk reserves. Just to give some context, that £5.8 million, based on our Q2 financial outturn position this financial year, would take our reserve balances to around about, general fund balances to around about £10 million, which are 3% of our net revenue operating budget. 3% is the absolute minimum that I would recommend as Section 151. My recommendation would be 5%, and our strategy over the next couple of years is to replenish those reserves to those levels, in excess of those levels. If you think for context, £10 million on general fund balance, if we're overspending, forecast overspend, 9 million we have been at this financial year, then that would reduce that general fund balance to virtually nothing, and that's not a situation that we can endure. So financial sustainability has been a big theme of the budget report, ensuring that we fund our pressures, ensuring that we deliver our savings, but also ensuring that we replenish our reserves to a recommended level. Okay, so that leads us on to People Services. So before I go into the People Services Directorate, has anybody got any questions on those opening statements? No?
Yeah, so we'll take any questions on the general big picture at this point. Anything from the committee first? Yes, Councillor Bolt.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for the work that's gone on. The Cabinet and the office is obviously relevant. There's clearly been a lot of work to go on producing this document and take it further to Council next month. And I appreciate that it's not an easy time for local government anywhere, but clearly we want to keep our services as diligently as possible for the people of Derby and ensure that we are providing quality services. My comment was regarding your final remarks, Alison, about the reserve situation. We are being sensible as a council, and I bear in mind what you said about replenishing the situation. So are you confident that we are in a good position should we have any emergency, unplanned incident in the city? Are you confident now that we have got I wouldn't say sufficient reserves, that's the wrong example, but are you more confident where we are, should there be an instance where we do need something for an unexpected occurrence?
I would say that the balance, the reserves, I would feel more comfortable if they were higher than what they were, and that's why we've got a strategy to replenish over the next 3 years. I mean, we need to be realistic that we're not going to get into that position in year one, but the strategy has to be around financial sustainability over the medium term. I think we've set a realistic budget for next year. We've invested, as I said, over £30 million of pressures into services, so I think what we've got to avoid is this yo-yoing of replenishing reserves and then overspending the next financial year. And I feel with the investment that we've been able to make into services to deal with some of those demand pressures, that we are actually setting a realistic budget and will enable us to then go into next financial year on a sound financial footing, to enable us then to continue with the strategy of replenishing those reserves.
Whilst we're on reserves, Alison, I had a question there as well in relation to that. You've described how the plan is to replenish the general fund reserve to an appropriate or a reasonable level. You didn't actually say what the budget risk reserve would be replenished to. What's the plan in relation to the budget risk reserve?
We do have some proposals to put some additional monies into the budget risk reserve. They would make, but that would make it a balance of around about £2 million by 2026, by the end of the financial year 2025. However, there are some commitments against that for future years. So that's necessary to ensure that we can meet those commitments going forward.
That doesn't seem a lot. Is that one of those reserves that you would see higher?
I'd like to see all of budget risk reserve and general fund reserve. Absolutely, would like to see those higher.
Can we explore this expression, the yo-yo effect, that in relation to reserves? Because last year there was a plan to replenish reserves, fairly substantial, as the chief executive describes it. But we've had to use those to cover off the debt, the gap in effect. Why is this yo-yo effect happening?
We are, when we set the budget, when we go into the next financial year, there are demand pressures, inflationary pressures that weren't accounted for within the budget, whether that's pay award that's been settled at a higher rate than we'd assumed, or whether demands for our services have exceed those that we've budgeted for. We are seeing some excessive increases that have been really difficult to model and plan for. If we think about the housing benefit subsidy loss in relation to temporary accommodation and homelessness, that's something that's really, we're sort of at a £4 million overspend position. That's unprecedented, and that's something that's sort of hit us in the last 18 months in relation to the levels of homelessness. So, a budget is a plan at a point in time, and deviation from that plan causes financial consequences in relation to that. Just hoping that, the fact that we have put probably more than £10 million additional monies that we would normally put into a budget will stop us from going into that overspend position, and that there's adequate resource within there to be able to deal with those fluctuations in demand.
I get that, but the danger and the temptation, therefore, is to pledge to replenish reserves in the knowledge that we might need to use it the following year, and give it thereby giving us a kind of a slush fund, a fund to be able to meet.
It would never be my recommendation that we would not have adequate levels of reserves. That's not the intention. Is not to replenish and to use. It is absolutely to replenish.
So you've accepted that the planned reserves, replenishment of reserves from last year didn't happen. What's to stop? How do we ensure that doesn't happen, that it actually happens this year, and it's a genuine determination to replenish reserves?
The intention was always to replenish the reserves. We set a budget that we thought at that point in time was a realistic budget. Things have overtaken us outside of our control that we've had to respond during the year. We're doing our utmost to protect those call-on reserves. We do know that our overspend this financial year is coming down. We do know that we have delivered nearly 100% of our savings, so we're doing everything we can to protect the clawing down of those reserves this financial year.
Okay, I don't know what to wish to labour the point, Alison, but obviously the danger is, and the temptation is to provide yourself use that money to rely on to be able to cover any overspends for next year and gaps in the budget, which is a worrying situation for me. Alison, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think everybody's alive to those concerns, Councillor Poulter, aren't they? And I think I just want to make one point about the situation with adult social care last year. I mean, when we took control, we were faced with a really bad, quite a serious backlog in safeguarding. And then I would say some weakness in the procedures in terms of monitoring and with the best will in the world of the staff, I think some of the procedures were not quite there in terms of monitoring demand. And obviously there was, right across the country, not only in Derby, an unprecedented surge of people wanting to draw on adult social care services for various reasons, which I have outlined before to the council in numerous forums. Won't do that now. But obviously, I'd say that now, with some of the improvement plans we have and some of the processes that we've got in place, we are in a better position. Well, first of all, we've got on top of that backlog in safeguarding. And secondly, we are in a better position to monitor and predict the draw on services and also the spend. And that work, that improvement work is ongoing, if you like. So whilst you can't actually, but these are statutory services, as everybody knows, and unfortunately, in the end, when people need those services and they have a statutory right to have them, then they will have them, and we obviously want to support everybody who is vulnerable, and we cannot exactly predict what that demand and draw on services will be in a year, but I think we are in a process of improving that. And if you see that this year we have put money into the budget to anticipate, more money has gone into the budget for adult social care to anticipate in advance those increase in pressures. So what I would say is, well, the point that you're making is a very valid one, and it's a problem this council's had, or most councils have, for many, many years. Certainly in some areas, and certainly in adult social care, there are actions that are happening and management processes being put into place to try to monitor better the spend and to try and have a better grasp of potential draw on services. Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely appreciate the efforts being made to reduce the risks and reduce the pressures on the budget, but with the best will in the world, in any council directorate, things can happen that knock you off those intended savings, and that's why sometimes we need reserves to deal with it, but we shouldn't be anticipating that we're going to have that issue. Leader, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I first of all would sort of like to reassure Exec Scrutiny that the additional settlement from government gives us an opportunity to revisit the pressures of this year, so that they don't roll over into next year. So, you know, I think it's important that that the board understands that we're making responsible financial fiscal decisions here that will hopefully avoid that situation from happening year on year. That's the opportunity that settlement has given us, so that we don't find ourselves in that yo-yo position, because we're being as realistic as we can about some of the pressures, especially, as Alison mentioned, in temporary accommodation. But you know, your point really makes the perfect example as to why we all, as a council, need to be responsible over this budget, because those reserves need building up so strongly and so desperately. You know, they have been whittled away over the years, and you know, it's the opportunity now is to give ourselves that resilience that we really need, because, you know, heaven forbid, you know, the city suffers an emergency, you know, or another flood, or, you know, whatever is next down the road, and we, you know, people look to us as a council to respond and react and to protect, you know, and we need that resilience in the reserves. So that's the reason why, you know, we have to raise council tax to the maximum. We have to maximise every opportunity to have the most core spending that we possibly can. I'd welcome a recommendation from Executive Scrutiny Board that actually recommends that we, that we protect and build our reserves, because that's certainly what we intend to do.
Thank you for that. I was minded, I've been listening to central government's budgetary issues and what they call their fiscal rules. They've set themselves fiscal rules in relation to borrowing. I think maybe that the replenishment of reserves is such an important factor that maybe, is it an ambition? It's part of the mid-term plan. Can we make it a fiscal rule of our own that we will make those replenishments?
There are some, I suppose that some of those exist to some extent in terms of as part of the final budget report, the section 151 officer has to issue what we call a section 25 statement, which is around adequacy of reserves, where I have to make a professional judgment around what those levels of reserves are and need to be. So I think that is something that's by statute, something that I have to issue, and where I would give Cabinet and Council my professional recommendation of those levels of the reserve. So I think that probably gives some kind of assurance that there's that judgment that is made on those levels as part of that report.
Okay, so in terms of the suggestion that the committee might recommend substantial or significant replenishment of the reserves, how could we recommend something that helps to guarantee that? Maybe something along the lines of reporting progress in relation to replenishment and a requirement to bring back any plans to deviate from the plans that you've got in relation to reserves?
I mean, they're all part of the medium-term financial strategy, so that strategy articulates what the ambition is for reserves, and that's a report that's been considered by Scrutiny Board and will be refreshed this year. So I think that's probably the mechanism through that strategy report to be able to, make the recommendation and well, not enforce, but obviously keep a track of what the strategy is for replenishment through that report.
Yes, I get that, but it needs to be highlighted. It needs to be somehow been a significant part of that report. I think, Alison, you first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Thank you for letting me come in again. I mean, surely this government have said that they want to move to longer-term 3-year budgeting process. It's telling us what our settlement will be over 3 years. They haven't been able to move to that yet. I think they still, my understanding is that they still intend to do that.
Yeah.
And surely that would be a point. I mean, we are not, like, the government can set fiscal rules because they're the overarching economic players, aren't they, in the economy. We are not that. We're the kind of like, we're subject to these variations in funding, and we can't actually control that, what comes from government. So surely anything that might be analogous to a governmental fiscal rule surely could only start to make sense when we've got that, that guarantee of a 3-year settlement.
Okay, I'll take your point. Okay, Councillor Cow and then Kerr and then Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Just about the way you're planning the meeting, Chair, because we're obviously talking about reserves now, but we also come to the reserves as one of the appendices later on. Are you wanting to have all the discussion on reserves now, or do you want to come back to it towards the end?
You can come back in more detail later on, but if you want to cover this aspect of it, then by all means I'll hear from.
My personal view is that we've got a lot to talk about tonight, that we could be talking about tonight, and the reserves is one aspect of that. The pressures are another aspect, and it might be that we want to talk about the different things, different directorates and the pressures and aspirations and the capital budget, and then come back at the end to consider what our recommendations would be and priorities.
Point taken. Councillor Wright.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by commending the Cabinet and the officers for working towards us having a balanced budget is quite an achievement. Within the context of sustainability, Alison, you mentioned, and I think this is in relation to next year, the need for 10 million worth of savings or cuts. We probably get some indication of what form that will take when we go through the different directorates. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm inclined to agree with the leader that the committee should make some recommendation in relation to reserves. Take the point that it should be dealt with on as part of the medium-term plan in terms of updates and things, but something, Stephen, on the lines of committee noted the report in relation to and the recommendations in relation to reserves and highlighted the importance of the replenishment of reserves for the safety of the City Council's finances, and recommend that the Cabinet prioritise the replenishment of reserves accordingly. Yeah. Okay. So everyone's okay with that? Yeah, good. Alison, just before we move on, then the other point, you've described how the windfall you got in relation overall from the September settlement, they describe it as a windfall, it's useful extra funding. You've described where it come from. Were there any other areas where funding was expected that you didn't, that changed, that wasn't as much as you thought?
There was some, if we just go back to that table, there was some minor variations, nothing significant and nothing out of the ordinary. There was a little minor variation on the social care grants, but we expect to see that anyway as we're going through. But you know, we were £3.7 million difference on the grant side of things, from the draft MTFP to the provisional, and as I said, 3.4 million of that was the recovery grant. So that was the main significant area.
Okay. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just conscious, because I think it's really important if we're going to talk about that specifically, that it is really clear why we got that recovery grant. So I think Alison may have mentioned this, but it is important to reiterate it, that the council, the government has made a decision that this money should be distributed to those local authorities with high levels of deprivation and a low council tax base. So I think it's important that, you know, the language around this it's not, because the press are in the room, and, you know, a windfall to the people of Derby may sound as though we've got, you know, a freebie, and it really is not that. So I think it's really, really important that everybody in the room and outside this room understands that that money has been targeted specifically by the government in terms of the money that's been distributed to support those local authorities with a low council tax base and with high levels of deprivation. I think most of the people in this room know that Derby, like many of our neighbours, certainly in terms of those urban areas, most of our properties are in bands A to 80% of our council tax properties are in bands A to D. So I, for one, certainly wouldn't want this to be seen in any way, shape or form as a windfall, because it isn't. I think what Alison was describing was the fact that actually we'd made an assumption about how much we would get, and we've ended up getting more, which is obviously very positive. And just, if I may, Chair, just comment on the point about reserves. Financial sustainability for local government is of paramount importance, and actually a local authority, which, let's be honest, is a small unitary authority with high levels of deprivation and a low council tax base, talking about putting money into reserves rather than taking money out of reserves, I think, and I have to again mind my language here, because again I don't want this to be seen as I'm crowing about this, because I'm absolutely not. But I think the position that the council is now in terms of balancing its budget and also being really clear, this council had put propositions forward to set a balanced budget prior to the provisional settlement. So again, I wouldn't want it to be seen that we haven't done the work to balance the budget, and we haven't looked to rely on central government to effectively bail us out. So we've put forward a balanced budget, and this money, as Alison is quite rightly suggesting in her role as Section 151 officer, should be to replenish this council's reserves, which are in a very low position, and we do need to replenish them so that we've got that financial sustainability over the short and medium term. But I think, in comparison to many authorities around us, we are actually in a good position, for want of a better phrase. And again, I wouldn't want that to be misinterpreted, that in any way, shape or form, I think the proposition about increasing council tax for people under financial pressure is a good thing. But as Chief Executive of this local authority, the people of Derby pay me to make sure that we make the right decisions for the financial sustainability of this organisation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Points taken, obviously. 3.7 million might not be described as a windfall, but it's certainly a useful extra amount of funding, unanticipated funding when it comes to balancing the books. But and also in terms of showing ourselves to be a financially responsible authority, the ambition to replenish reserves is absolutely laudable and the right thing to do. My point was that we didn't manage to achieve that last year, and we need to make sure that we do this and for the next 3 years. Otherwise, we're going to get that yo-yo effect again. Okay. Right. Yes, Councillor Holmes.
Slightly jumping ahead, but I think it's probably worthwhile me mentioning this because I was going to bring it up when we went through the different directorates, but the Chief Exec quite rightly has laid out information about the recovery grant, and you, Chair, have just mentioned it. Just one example of why that necessarily, it's a good news story. However, if you look in the budget further on, the council has now got an increase in national insurance contributions of, is it 2.5 million? So the government giveth, the government taketh away. You know, so this is how it, you know, and there's other examples of this. So that recovery grant really mostly has been wiped out already by another government decision. And you can have examples of that all the way through the budget. And so, yeah, I totally agree. The council is in a very difficult position. And that demonstrates it. Just one example, really.
That's one example. Maybe the minimum wage is another one. Alison, did you want to comment on that at this point?
Yeah, so the increase in employees' national insurance contributions, there's a compensation scheme, so there's £515 million nationally to fund that. So that will fund, subject to the distribution, but that will fund direct employees of the council in terms of the increases that the council's exposed to. What it doesn't do, though, is it doesn't compensate for those costs that will be passed on to us through our service contracts through other providers. The biggest hike in that, the biggest area of that would be in adult social care, where we commission and don't provide our services ourselves. So there are pressures that we will face. In terms of the national living wage, those two are pressures facing us, so that's gone up by circa 6% in terms of the increase of national living wage, and again that will impact on the cost of services that we commission through the third sector and private sector. So we are subject to some additional cost increases in association with that. In response to that, obviously the local government finance settlement is open to out the consultation that closes next week nationally. The government's response to that is that they will say that core spending power increases of circa 8%, which is what local government is getting next year, will compensate for some of those increased costs that we're seeing in terms of social care costs.
Okay, just before I move on, the very last point I was going to raise about your initial opening gambit was you talked about the gap for 26, 27, 28 being 9.8 million currently anticipated. I got in my mind that was going to be more. Is it more or less than you anticipated as a result when you've come down to the final numbers?
It's less than what we'd assumed was going to be when we set the budget last year, because obviously the additional funding will impact on that. But I suppose we would have to look at those figures with caution. We've only got, as Councillor Morton described, we've only got a one-year funding settlement, so we've had to make assumptions around future years' allocations. So whilst it's less than what it was, I would still treat those figures with caution until we get a more medium-term financial settlement.
How much less is it, roughly?
It was 15.5 million when we set the budget. It's down to 9.8.
Okay, if there's no other points at this stage, we move on then to the directorates and their positions.
So we'll start with People Services, and Sharon Buckby will introduce People Services.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you, Chair. I think Alison and Councillor Martin's set the scene quite well with regards to People Services in terms of our budget pressures. We know we're well versed in what those pressures are, and they are around the demand and increased costs in the main for adult social care, but also for children's social care. So what we've assumed in the pressures that we've forecast, is that there's going to be, we'll need to continue to support our adult social care provider markets to assure the sustainability of the services that our residents receive. And as a consequence of that, we have assumed that there will be increases of between 4.1% and 4.7% across our care homes, as well as day opportunity services as well. The pressures around children and young people services, we do have some investment for the pressures for safeguarding, fostering and inflation on contracts. And we do hope that the new Children and Wellbeing and Schools Bill will offer some further respite within that arena too. So whilst with forecasted pressures, we have built in those based on the potential costs that we might have. But that doesn't mean to say that we aren't continuing with our due diligence in our approaches to monitoring our financial investments. So savings do really focus on how we might continue with our ongoing due diligence around adult social care and also children's social care, and by applying a more effective and strength-based approach to care delivery. That's been an ongoing program of work for the last 2 years, but especially focused in the last 12 months. And I know that Andy Appleyard can give further detail around that if councillors wish that, or the committee wish that. We do intend to continue with our journey with regards to artificial intelligence, and that due diligence that we've been applying to different elements of council business will move towards other parts of the People Services Directorate. We are also going to be reviewing our home-to-school transport contracts to explore whether there's any efficiencies and savings that can be made within that arena, obviously within the context of statutory expectations. We are also, however, as this slide demonstrates, looking to make some proposals around reductions in staffing. The staff within the People Service Directorate has spent an awful lot of time looking at how we actually manage to do this whilst maintaining good quality provision for children, young people and adults, and have wherever possible explored alternative arrangements for how we can make those service savings. So as a consequence of that, and working with our staff, we've been able to identify the proposed FTE reductions, not through significant redundancies, but exploring how we do that through voluntary redundancy and also addressing agency costs and, wherever possible and safe, to remove vacancies. So that work has resulted in, with regards to adult social care, reconfiguration and restructure, including deletion of vacant posts, recruitment to permanent staff where agency staff have been used previously. We've looked at the deletion of a public health intelligence analyst post. Within children and young people services, the majority of the actions have been enabled through vacancy reduction or voluntary redundancy. We have, in effect, over adult social care and children's social care, a total of 5 FTEs that we're looking to move to reducing the staffing ratio, which will impact on 5 FTE of our workforce. There will be there is no intention to make any compulsory redundancies in early help. We are reconfiguring the adult learning and employment and skills service on the basis of operational efficiencies and the reduction in grant funding coming along, which means that we have to refocus how we're operating. There are deletion of vacant posts in commissioning and brokerage. We are looking at a reduction in the capacity of the school organisation team and the home to school transport team. But we're also looking at how we might use other grant funded arrangements and moving staff from the general fund into that grant funding proposals. But they are not fixed term. They are grants that are ongoing and ring-fenced through government allocation. So what we've attempted to do in looking to making the savings is to focus on efficiencies whilst remaining and retaining a safe service and one that offers good quality to our residents. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you for that introduction, shall we say. I'm sure there were some points that will come out of that, but my first observations are you point out that this work has been ongoing for a couple of years, and the first thing to acknowledge is the success in relation to children's services, and that some of those plans and savings are starting to bear fruit and come to fruition, so that the overspend in that area is significantly less than it used to be. Unfortunately, the extra costs have been transferred to adult services, and you're obviously going to do the same in relation to that. So I think we should welcome some extra grant funding and extra funding along the way, coupled with the fruit borne from the savings plans that have been developed over some period now. Yes, there is some effect on jobs and full-time equivalents, but some of that can be put down to efficiency and better organisation and whatever. So, and they are less than they could be in relation to, I think, so in relation to full-time equivalents. A couple of areas where you skip past quite quickly in relation to, for example, AI and the expansion of the use of AI within adult services in particular. There are savings targets been put forward in relation to the use of AI, which we know are not meeting haven't met in the recent past targets, and there's nervousness, shall I say, around AI, and I'll ask Andy to maybe come back on that. And the other one I was going to pick up with you was the ambition in relation to home to school transport. All I'd say there is good luck with that. It's something that attempts have been made to address that a number of occasions in the past, and it's proved very difficult, and it's very difficult because in doing so there's an absolute need to bear in mind the individual's needs whilst trying to formulate some sort of policy in relation to home to school transport, because I know from personal experience with two special needs grandchildren that changes to the home to school regime can significantly affect that person and that family, and it's a difficult area. Do you want to say any more about your plans in relation to home to school transport?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're currently actually underspending with regards to our home to school transport, and £400,000 in the last quarter we were underspending. But we've also got some aspirations around how we might increase independent travel training. So we're supporting young people to become much more aware that where possible, obviously consistent with what you've already pointed out, Chair, where possible, that we can support young adults, young people who are much more able to manoeuvre around the city and feel confident in travelling, not just to their school, but to other centres, whether that's to the cinema, etc. And that's part of our preparation for adulthood work. So we really do want to focus how we do that, but that's being built on the back of a budget that we're already underspending within.
Yes, I'm absolutely for independent travel where possible, because it builds the skills for future life and going forwards. But the young people and the families need that explained to them and the time to make it work. So good luck with that. Andy, I don't know if you wanted to come in at this point and just talk about the nervousness around AI and or whoever.
Thank you, Chair. So I think, as everybody will know...
Sorry, could you just state your name?
Of course. My name's Andy Appleyard. I'm the Interim Director of Adult Social Care Services in Derby City Council. I think everybody is aware of the ambitious targets that we had, the savings targets that we had in adult social care last year. One of the things that we always proposed to do was to conduct a set number of reviews across adult social care, to look at the possibility of achieving savings through proportionate handling, strength-based approaches, and maximising people's independence. We always knew, as I say, that we had an ambition of conducting 1,100 reviews, but always knew that we would have to undertake a review after a set number of reviews had taken place. That would enable us to ensure that we were acting in the best and most appropriate way. So we've conducted 183 reviews to date. That leaves us in the region of about another 800 reviews that need to take place. We will be delivering training to internal staff, to local care providers, and supporting health colleagues to understand how we can deliver care differently in Derby. So we've taken the opportunity to look at what needs to be done, how we need to deliver training, and how we need to shape the market going forward. The next thing that we're looking to do within adult social care is undertake financial assessment reviews. So we've had a backlog of financial assessments that haven't taken place for a number of years. We have brought in some additional support us to enact those assessments, which is starting to show some real worth in terms of what can be achieved. We will obviously not expect anybody to contribute more to their care than they can afford to do so, but are moving to a position where there is parity in terms of who is contributing to their care and how much they're contributing. So in the next financial year, we are very confident that we'll be able to achieve the savings that we've put forward in this budget.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, I think I probably urge caution around the financial reviews. People are experiencing a tightening of the gap between their income and the limits that we have in relation to funding for social care and for housing benefits as well. So whilst it's necessary and there's a lot to do, I think I'd probably urge caution in relation to dealing with each individual in their own situation.
No, I think we all will come at that from the same point of view. As I say, we will not. Every individual, every assessment is done individually, so we understand people's financial situation. Nobody will contribute more to their care and support than they can afford to do so, but this will ensure that everybody who receives adult social care services is in the same position in terms of contributing to their eligible care and support needs.
Okay, any points from the committee? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. And like you, Chair, I'm a real advocate for the independent travel training, but the figures that we had, I think it was last quarter, showed that there are actually very few individuals who are actually participating in this. So it's difficult to see how that can make a significant impact unless the number of young people who are involved in that scheme is significantly increased. So I don't want us to be over-ambitious on that front. I actually wonder whether, if it's a mechanism, a training offer that is valuable and seen as successful, whether there are young people in mainstream settings whose parents might actually want to purchase that training so that they are no longer dependent on parents for actually doing the journeys to and from school, which may be a burden on individuals and making it difficult for additional income, for example, into the household. And I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to explore that as a service and whether it's something that would then be of benefit to our congestion at school start and finish times as well. I have concerns, though, about some of the numbers in terms of some of the reductions in staffing. You know, in the paperwork, we're told that there are 15 full-time equivalents going in early help. Yes, there are vacancies at the moment, but early help, we've been told again and again, is really important for reducing future costs. And I just wonder whether we should be actually filling these vacancies and reducing future costs rather than deleting the posts. And we can't tell from the paperwork we've got in front of us as to whether that is something that has been explored or should be explored rather than the scenario that we've got presented to us. Similarly, there is mention of fostering. Clearly, we are now using East Midlands and the fostering that's going on there, and there's been a grant reduction on that. But there's also reduction in our fostering support within the fostering team. And I don't know whether this is a double hit that we've not factored in, because the more of our own fosterers that we're able to do, rather than buying in fostering services from the private sector, again, we know is of real benefit. So again, we can't tell from what we've got here as to whether the East Midlands fostering team is delivering on the promises that we hoped for, or whether that's still to be assessed, and whether it's an area where we are actually going to cut and then result in higher costs later on. So I'd appreciate some more comments on both those areas, Chair.
Andy, did you want to come back? Can you come back on any of those? I get your point, Councillor Kerr, in relation to parents' involvement in home-to-school transport. We're probably all of the age where we can remember walking to school when we were 6 and back again, but those times have changed. But I have to say, probably some parents are guilty of not encouraging independent travel. But where it comes to special educational needs, my experience is that maybe 2 years later than somebody without those needs, young people are then capable of some independent travel. So I think we need to work.
Can I pick up on all the points that Councillor Kerr makes as they fall in children's services? So with regards to the home to school transport, starting as early as we possibly can to prepare every young person for adulthood is absolutely where our focus should be. And certainly those with special educational needs, we really do need to think earlier into secondary, but not into primary. So with regards to being able, well, actually I'm saying that, Councillor Kerr, wherever possible, we should also explore how walking to school and other activities to school via for children in primary would be appropriate with parental support if that was at all possible. But certainly it is something that we have an ambition to do and expand. We already have supported 50 young people this year to go through independent travel training, but we need to expand that much more. But with Chair's points about it being appropriate in a careful way and one that is supported. So it's a programme that we're not going to rush into, but it is something that we're actively going to be exploring how we expand. With regards to the early help vacancies, these are not for early help or childcare practitioners. These are support staff. So in the main, administrators, where there already are vacancies. We recognise that the work that we're doing around bringing in artificial intelligence to help staff to manage their administration more effectively will be a critical part of this, but they are vacancies that we are managing without any agency staff within at the moment, so the delivery is not being affected. With regards to foster care, we've been very careful about how we look at that, and part of that is reducing duplication across staff teams. So there will be some element of being duly diligent around the application of financial resources and withdrawing those where appropriate, where, for example, an individual is no longer a foster carer with us. So we are looking at being much more placing a better lens on how we're applying. But we will not, and I hope councillors are assured by this, we will not take steps where we believe that children will be put at risk, or indeed where we cannot maximise a more effective foster care service that is our own. So there are excellent points to raise, and thank you for those. And I'm sure that Sue Ann will bring back a paper with regards to how the regional programme is working in due course.
Did you need to come back, Councillor Kerr?
No, the 50 young people having been trained this year, I think the figure that I remember was about 21, so that's a significant improvement.
Does the Cabinet member wish to contribute at this point? Our leader? No? Okay. Any other questions, comments? In that case, we can move on.
So next is Communities in Place. Sam.
Thanks, Alison. Sam Dennis, Strategic Director for Place. The Place Department has significantly smaller budgets than the People Services Department. So just looking at the pressures and savings, they are smaller in scale, but I think we all agree the Place Department does deliver important services for all residents. The key financial pressures within Place in the 25-26 budget amount to 2.25 million. Alison's picked up some of those issues already as she's talked through her presentation, with things like temporary accommodation and the rising costs and the increase in demand on temporary accommodation. There have been some increases in the cost of things like waste disposal and new burdens around waste. Also some increase in costs of maintaining the crematorium and also a reinvestment back into frontline services with an increase in grass cutting has been put in this budget. In terms of the budget adjustments and savings, the police department savings within this MTFP do total 709,000. Within the waste service, there's also been additional funding from the government around the extended producer responsibility, but that has supported the overall financial position of the council. So Derby, you'll see in the report, Chair, was awarded £5.7 million from the extended producer responsibility payments. It's likely that those payments will reduce in the future as producers start to change their behaviours. So in terms of modelling going forward, we've got to be cautious around that. The savings put forward are in the table, so I won't go through the existing savings that were approved by full council on the 28th of February last year, just to pick out a number of the savings in this year's. So they're things like looking at the size of the residual domestic bins for new properties and requested replacements, reintroducing the booking system at the Household Waste Recycling Centre, subject to the Cabinet review, replacing the 2 weeks free bulky waste collection with a voucher scheme, reviewing the statutory library budgets, use of an external grant to cover a transport post, use of income to cover some maintenance costs, income from the More Ways Leisure contract. So they are the savings. There is a reversal there, something that was put in and taken out, so that's netted itself off. In terms of staff reductions, that as you'll see on the slide, there is a requirement to reduce the FTE positions down from 35.16 FTE. 22 of those posts are vacant, which leaves 13.16 to assess. To avoid compulsory redundancies, the vacant posts have been deleted. Any requests from employees to reduce their hours, so to go part-time or to job share, things like that, we've considered and approved where we're able to. And we have agreed some voluntary redundancies, but we have managed to achieve that FTE reduction without any compulsory redundancies in the Police Directorate, which is really good news for our workforce, who obviously are our most important assets as an organisation like this. To manage those reductions, there have been some reconfigurations made within services such as planning, culture, leisure and sustainability, where we've looked at being able to be as efficient and effective as possible and manage the demands with the amount of resource that we have available to us. That's pretty much it for the Police Directorate. The Police Directors are here, so if there are any detailed questions, we are happy to pick up those questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You point out that your actual budget is not the largest, but within that budget you need to provide, I would say, the bulk of front-facing services for the council. And I appreciate that from the past, as I'm sure we all do, because these are the sort of things you talked about are those that we as councillors get contacted about on a regular basis. Dog poo and dustbins, as we used to call it, and still do sometimes. So we appreciate the problems, but the fact that the budgets are what they are, some of them you can only cut and make savings to a certain degree. And I'm a little bit concerned, what's the policy in relation to vacant posts? Are all vacant posts being deleted, or are we assessing the service's ability to manage those vacant post losses?
Directors have made assessments of those vacant posts. So Sharon's talked about where if we've got agency in, then clearly we need to recruit rather than delete a vacant post. So we have taken a view across the services. Where we've had vacant posts and we've been managing for those posts for a long time and the team have picked up the work, we've been able to delete those posts. But there is an ongoing need to continue to evaluate the services and try and be as lean and effective as we can, which we've been doing, as you'll be aware, Chair, on an ongoing basis over a number of years. So we are getting quite good at trying to do more with less and using technology, for example, to support us in doing that.
But as I say, there are limits. And can I give you one example here? On Saturday, I attended the tree shredding in Spondon, done by a couple of operatives from who are grass cutters. And in talking to them, they described the staffing levels within their own section as being absolutely bare minimum and beyond, with another, one of the employees, one of the 3 left employed for grass cutting purposes, is the same age as me and about to retire. So he needs replacing, is my point. If you have an ambition to improve the grass cutting for this coming year, then that's certainly one department that needs looking at it. I don't know whether Simon or anybody else can comment on those levels, because if there is a plan to do grass cutting better than we did last year, the staffing levels need to be appropriate.
Absolutely, Chair. Verna Bayliss has been looking at this. I'm going to hand over to Verna, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, certainly, I'd agree that it's been a very difficult year for grass cutting in particular, and you'll see in the budget that there is an additional 200k for the service to exactly right, as you say, put some of that capacity back in. So that should give us, I think it's an approximately 6 gardeners, which will make a big difference, we hope, to the service. Mindful that, you know, things that we have in place, like how we cut the grass, the grass clippings being left, that we don't cut around the, you know, around the bottom of trees and around the infrastructure like benches, etc., will remain the same, because that's been a policy that we've had for a long time, for a number of years. But yes, the additional resource should see a noticeable difference in the turnaround for grass cutting, because we know the grass is only growing longer, and because the climate is getting wetter and warmer. So we know from clear evidence and national evidence that there are some big spikes when the grass grows. So it's been a very challenging year, Councillor, and I appreciate your concerns.
I don't want to get bogged down with grass cutting, but when they describe how much more the grass has grown and how much longer it's been left to come, it's right. You need a scythe rather than a mower to get through it. It makes their job more difficult to be able to produce a reasonable job, and it was certainly in my time in relation to Councillor's work last year. Yes, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Samantha, for your presentation. I'm quite impressed that you were able to get more out of the budget, because as already been said, the services you offer are outward-facing services that we constantly get emails from in terms of our residents if things are not as they would like them to be, or they see a deficiency or deficiencies. Can I just, I know the Chair doesn't want to go on about grass cutting, because grass cutting was one of the issues certainly last year across the piece. Could you say a little bit more about grass cutting? How much by way of resources is going to go into that? Because as has rightfully been said, however wonderful we are, we sometimes do find it very difficult to control nature.
The weather.
And as we know, we have a situation globally in terms of nature fighting back. So we may get tsunami this coming summer, which means they will have to cut the grass more regularly. So can you give us a sense of how much you're putting into that provision, please? Thank you.
Anything to add, Verna, to what you already said?
I guess just to add, as I say, that there's an additional 6 posts should be funded through the additional funding that's part of the budget's proposals. So we expect to see I mean, there have been occasions last year, again, as I say, very difficult year, and the team do, you know, they're operating in over 400 parks and open spaces. They've got crematorium, golf course, etc. to deal with. So, so it's a significant increase in staffing, and you know, we hope that should bring us into the line of, you know, those 6 weekly turnarounds for where we do standard grass cutting, accepting that different areas have different regimes and routines in place. So, so yes, we should see a difference in the grass cutting this year. Although obviously I never know what the weather's going to do.
Right, I'm getting quite a few hands. I've got a leader, Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously £200,000 is a significant investment from this Cabinet to increase the grass cutting service. As has been described, obviously that's an increase in the staff that will provide that, which I should really remind the board that was cut in the 2020 in your own 2023 budget. 2 posts were reduced in the grass cutting in that budget before you left the administration. That resulted.
Are we keeping this a sensible discussion?
Certainly
or
are.
Are we getting into politics?
We certainly are, because that cut resulted in the weekly turnover changing from 6 weekly cuts to at least 8, and in real terms, it was probably more than that. So putting that provision back in is really important. But also, I believe that the investment also is buying a new machine that will cut wet grass. Is that correct?
Yeah, the proposals are for there are different machines to cut. Now the grass is long. I know it's quite technical, isn't it? It takes longer to mow, so you need a different sort of mower. So yes, we would hope to do that as well.
Thank you for confirming that, Werner. Yeah, so obviously, up to now, our machinery and the operations of those have been restricted if we've had continuous wet weather, but the investment into a wet grass cutting machine is going to mean that they can cut all year round.
Thank you. Just for the record, the lads I spoke to on the ground on Saturday described how last year they were 5, currently they are 3. So there's a reduction in the service, in the staff members available, by whatever means it is. Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce what the leader said, I mean, when I came in and I was the cabinet member who had to look at the challenge of grass cutting, which and one of the first things I identified was why is it causing such difficulties? And as the officers have said, one of the reasons is that the growing season has increased year on year, and climate change might have something to do with that. That was one factor, and we needed to begin to adjust to see what machinery we can get to sort of more appropriately respond to that particular issue. And then the growing season, where in the past it would be about 3 to 4 months maybe, now it's about 6 to 9 months. It seems to be sort of and so those are challenges which I certainly talked with officers about in terms of how we can sort of take them on board. But there was also a reduction which happened in the budget before we took control of the number of gardeners that were available. So that had an impact. So both of those things needed funding to turn it around, and the £200,000, I'm really pleased that the Cabinet has been able to identify that, not initially in the consultation process, but in terms of the settlement we've had recently. So I'm hoping that we can at least get back to the levels of cuts we were doing. So I think it's a really positive thing, and I hope the Scrutiny Board appreciates that this is quite a good investment, and hopefully we can sort of meet the challenges that all of us have had from our residents who have said their comments about grass cutting in particular.
So we are in danger of getting bogged down with the grass cuttings, I think. There's so many of them. Opportunity for the Cabinet member to comment.
Chair, just to clarify, I mean, I did say we have put money in as opposed to the £200,000 investment, not taking anything out ourselves.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Onoha. The leader has certainly covered the grounds I had wanted to cover myself. We're you know, so I think I'll reserve my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kerr, then Councillor Bonson.
Thank you for that. We've talked quite a lot about staff changes, and I can see the advantage in deleting posts which are already vacant. However, that can at times lead to a reduction in capacity in terms of expertise. And I'm just concerned that we don't presume that it's right to lose a vacant post when it's actually losing the capacity and will result in poorer decisions or in having to get consultants in because we haven't got the expertise in ourselves any longer. And particularly here where we're talking about losing 10 members of staff within communities, and I'm not quite sure where or what those staff are, some of which are vacant, and 18, okay, 10 of them are currently vacant in sustainability. It seems to be quite a lot of losses of staff from what I think of as very critical areas. So that's the first question, so it's some reassurance on that. And the second point I was going to ask about was on street lighting. There's a comment about street lighting model shortfall, and I don't quite know what that saving is. But I'm also conscious that other councils, including Derbyshire, are now turning off street lighting during the night, including in some urban areas. And I wondered whether there'd been any consideration given to that for Derby. And you know, there is probably some studies now done in Derbyshire and other places where the reaction from the public on that has been assessed. And we could be looking at that. And it's when we're talking about looking at a pressure in terms of a traffic light operational costs and reducing that by upgrading traffic lights, should we actually be asking whether we need the traffic lights at all? I've been amazed on Cornmarket into St Peter Street at how well the pedestrian crossing facility works with actually people not touching the lights at all, because we're only talking about a few buses and cycles going through at that junction. People don't bother pushing the buttons. Do we actually need traffic lights at that point, or could we reduce the speed down to probably 10 miles an hour through there and not need to pay for traffic lights at all and their running costs? I don't know if there's going to be reviews happening that are that radical, but if we are continuing in this direction, it may be that we have scope to do that, and maybe they can be done in the current year to help with those shortfalls in the following year.
Somebody want to come back on that? Simon, would you like to go first? Then I'll come to you then.
Thank you, Chair. It's Simon Aiken, Acting Director of Communities. So just really picking up the question around vacancies. So as an ongoing process, whenever vacancies come available, we always review them. So as a management team, we're looking at all those vacancies. We're looking to see whether we can postpone recruitment, whether we can delete those vacancies, or whether we need to fill them. So within my areas, I've got roles that we are still actively recruiting because they are critical for what we need to do. So that is reviewed on every time a vacancy comes available. So I just want to be clear that just because the vacancies doesn't mean that we are actually making those redundant or deleting those. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, and I would reiterate the same approach goes for our areas for vacancies, and certainly one of the areas we went down, removed a head of service last year, so we've had a full restructure in the department particularly. So while there are some of those posts deleted, there are also posts created through that, which obviously isn't expressed in this format. So I would certainly agree with Simon. On the street lighting, I know it's something you raised last year, Councillor, around dimming, and we had an extensive look into it. And I appreciate that some other councils do this. As you're aware, we've focused on changing to LEDs to reduce the cost of energy and to reduce the efficiency and to increase the efficiency of our street lighting. And you know, through the PFI, only some lighting is in that PFI and some isn't. It's very difficult for us to dim, and we do dim already. Obviously, it's not necessarily that's perceptible to the human eye because it doesn't make a difference, but we are already in the process of dimming, and some switch off. But generally speaking, it's not recommended. There is the safety factors to consider as part of that. If we're funding areas, if we're thinking about violence against women and girls and safe streets, it's important to have street lighting as well. So there's a real balance to be taken forward in this approach. And also is that there are some really difficult practical matters in doing this. There's only a small amount of our street lights that are actually actively connected to a single unit, if you like, to a brain, so that we could switch them and organise them together. Otherwise, somebody would have to go and switch and change the dimming and the factors on every single lamppost, which would be very expensive. I appreciate that's quite technical, but it's something to take into consideration. We will always keep it in mind, though. I do appreciate, as we're seeing some councils taking more drastic action, we'll review that as we go along and see the impact of that. But as it stands at the moment, we do dim, and we'll just keep it under review and give you more details as you come. And I know you asked about the PFI shortfall as well, and I will probably pass to finance colleagues to help me answer that one, because it's a technical finance issue, not with the streetlights themselves.
Tony, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you. I'm Tony Nash, Head of Finance. So we've done some initial modelling on the PFIs, and in the street lighting one, early estimates thinks we're going to have a shortfall because of inflationary increases over the lifetime of the model. So this is an early indication of to be able to afford that over the lifetime.
My own information, Tony, when's the PFI run till? How long has it got to go?
We've got another 7 years. So is that 32? Yeah.
Yeah, 2032.
Councillor, I've got Councillor Bonds first, then Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just a brief comment really for Sam and your team. Whilst nobody wants to make cuts, very difficult decisions all round, I am grateful and encouraged that you've managed to manage the staffing situation and work so hard to avoid compulsory redundancies in your directorate. Well done.
Like succinct comments like that. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Could we just have just a little bit more detail on the PFI? And I know it's 26, 27. It's 1 million pressure, isn't it? The in-place directorate street line potential model shortfall. So, inflation. Just explain to me. I'm not quite sure I understand how we've ended up with a £1 million potential pressure on a PFI contract.
So we remodel every year. We look at the PFIs every year to make sure that they're affordable. It's like a long-term loan in effect. That's quite an easy way of putting it. So the inflation increases will affect that. So we've done some modelling on all of them to make sure we've got sufficient monies within the PFI, within the reserves and within the base budget to afford them. So, I mean, it's quite technical, the different ways where it can go up, but we can do you a note on it.
Maybe more detail on that, Chair. I'm a little bit confused. I thought PFI contracts, even though they are long-term, based on inflation in the contracts plus whatever, yeah, I wouldn't have thought why the council should end up with a pressure. But anyway, I don't know.
No, I get your point. There's an assumption that with a PFI, the costs are covered and built into the contract. I'm sure there are aspects of it where there are variations, but £1 million does seem a lot. So are you content to get a note on the detail?
I think so, Chair. It's going to be far too complicated by the sounds of it to discuss it this evening, but I would appreciate a note on that if possible, in plain English, please. 7
years in terms of PFI contracts is not a long time either, so presumably you're looking to the future after the PFI contract before too long.
Yes, we've got a working group set up for the exiting of the PFIs, yeah.
Okay. Last couple of points from me then, Sam. Rainsway, you mentioned it in your opening piece about Rainsway being a saving in terms of reintroducing the booking system on a Sunday. We obviously had the paper last week and a lot of discussion. It went to Cabinet. What's the actual proposal now in relation to Sundays?
Can I direct to Simon, please, Chair?
By all means. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper that went to Cabinet last week was to review the operating since the site went to the free Sundays. There is a line in the MTFP which is linked to 149,000 for the removal of that Sunday, but that's currently out to consultation as part of the MTFP process with the public to see what views that we're getting back from the public as to whether that's moved forwards.
So that's not it's a proposal, potential proposal. And
That's
it's
correct,
not
Chair.
149,000, it's 200 odd thousand, but lies another story. Okay, so we'll hear the devil's in the detail there, I suppose, as to what the proposal is. And the other one was in relation to libraries. You said that you were looking at the funding for in relation to statutory libraries. Can I ask where you're at in terms of funding for both statutory and non-statutory libraries? Because it's a little bit thin, the papers, I think, in relation to particularly the non-statutory library and the costs.
Thanks, Chair. So can I just clarify, are you on about the savings that are apportioned to the library service?
My interest was prompted by Sam's mention of libraries in the potential savings, but I've heard from other quarters, Councillor Moore-Hall, who couldn't be here tonight now because he's ill, mentioned to me a query around the arrangements and the funding for the non-statutory libraries and any savings that might be brought out of that, or otherwise.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a number of savings that we're looking to do within the libraries. So as sort of moving towards the community model, there'll be a saving in staffing that we're looking to achieve from doing that of around £100,000. We're also doing a restructure within the statutory library service, which will look to sort of rearrange the resources and make sure that we've got the right people in the right places, but that will see a reduction of staff. We've also got the reduction of in the purchase of books, so we've took a 1-year reduction in that budget line, and then we've also gone through the other budget lines just to sort of do that review and see things that sometimes budget lines which aren't spent, we've looked to sort of rationalise them as best we can. So that's the reductions in that service. Thanks, Chair.
Again, the devil might be in the detail at a later stage. Right, any other comments, questions? Councillor Holmes.
Just one, Chair, thank you. What lies behind the 750,000 increase in temporary accommodation costs?
So what lies behind it, as in what's the
Yeah, just an
reason?
overview of where, you know, what
It's
are the
predominantly
reasons?
bed and breakfast costs.
Yes.
For
Bed and
who?
breakfast.
For in what? In
Where we're having to use B&Bs for temporary accommodation solutions.
for adults or families or?
It's both, Councillor Holmes. So we've seen an increase in homelessness nationally. So Derby's no different, and we've had to use temporary accommodation to house either single people or families. And we've seen families in temporary accommodation for longer than they should be as well because of the national situation around homelessness.
It's entirely down to homelessness?
Yeah, that's the homelessness service, the budget lines attached to it. One is the temporary accommodation budget, and that's the budget where we've seen the pressure because there are more people becoming homeless, and the cost of provision for people who are homeless is escalated because we are now using bed and breakfast and other other options like Airbnbs, etc.
There are, of course, a number of initiatives to help provide extra suitable housing for this category to reduce that expenditure, like the what's it called on Newtox Road, the Abbey Lodge, that's right, and other initiatives and funding that's been used to provide extra accommodation, because those other costs are ridiculous, really, but there you go. Okay, Lisa, I think you want to come in to finish this section off.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, our Cabinet's initiative of Abbey Lodge is certainly reducing that pressure, as is the government's move to, well, you said it, you were promoting it, as is the government's... As is the government's restriction decisions on the right to buy will have an impact on that as well. I just had a question for Alison on Councillor Holmes's comment about the street lighting PFI, because I don't know, I'm wondering where he's got £1 million from, because it looks to me like it's 80,000, unless I'm got my numbers mixed up.
There is £1 million pressure on the place pressures.
Where are we
for
looking?
year 2, 26-27.
There's no page numbers on the paper, so I can't.
Appendix,
26, 27.
Appendix 3, second page, top half of the table. Street lighting, model shortfall.
I still can't see it. Sorry, thank you, but I can't still.
Can the Cabinet member help with that? Councillor Honour? Any knowledge about this cost?
Yeah, it's. I'm sure the officers had given some answers to that previously, Councillor. I don't know if there's any specific thing you want me to say to that.
I'm sure before the leader finalises the budget, then she'll make sure she's fully aware of what's going on there. Yes.
Just in general, PFI contracts provide for sharing of risk in around the financial circumstances of the PFI contract, and there will be changes which are covered by the councils and increases and changes which are covered by the contractor. Those are all set out in the financial model and provide for the sharing of those risks, and above certain thresholds, those risks are not contained within the PFI contract. The PFI contract does not contain all costs to the council. There will be circumstances where a change in circumstance, change in inflation, change of law will be borne by the councils, and that's what the work that finance has done has modelled, that there is the potential for that pressure to come through as a cost to the councils under the procurement contract. So the PFI contracts, that's just, I was going to highlight, just wanted to explain that.
I think Councillor Holmes might want to come in. I think it was highlighted because of the amount. It's not an insignificant amount.
But it just highlights the fact that you have to be very careful in setting up and negotiating PFI contracts, especially when they're over a period of time. You know, I'm not necessarily criticising or otherwise. What I'm just saying is that it's a significant pressure. And I think, I assume that an overview and scrutiny committee is looking at this. So it does need scrutiny.
Okay, we'll move on then. Sorry, Councillor Wright. Did I miss your hand?
I just wanted to go back to the point made about further reduction in staffing of the library provision, particularly the statutory. In the context of a region where educational attainment is relatively low, and specifically in relation to the city, I think it is worrying that we are further cutting infrastructural support to communities who need that infrastructural support to ensure that they attain within our education system. So I think we need to look at that again in terms of further cuts. Thank you.
Simon, you touched on who some of the staff that are going to be the full-time equivalents are. Some of those are going to be around those that have been needed to support the voluntary libraries, I take it, and the introduction of a new provider will help make those savings. But the general point about losing library staff, do you want to comment on that?
You're right, Chair. There is a review in both sides of that structure. So there is a review within the statutory libraries and the community libraries, and that will be a reduction of staff. I think the in total is 2.69 FTEs. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Right. Next.
So, Chief Executive's Department, Paul Simpson.
Chief Executive, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as colleagues have already outlined, obviously we followed it. It's a very, well, the identical process in terms of the pressures and savings in the Chief Exec's Department. And just for clarity, the Chief Exec's Department consists of, I'm not going to call them back office because I don't think that's particularly helpful. I'm going to call them facilitative or support service or enabling services, call them what you will. But basically the Chief Exec's Department there is to provide support to front-facing services in terms of those key professional services like finance, legal, property, ICT, procurement, so on and so forth. And so we're responsible obviously for ensuring the council makes appropriate decisions, takes those decisions lawfully, and obviously of course ensures that the council provides value for money. Those are the key the kind of key objectives, if you like, of the Chief Exec's Department, and ensures that the council is well managed and well governed, and obviously supports the decision making process as well through things like democratic services. So really, really important that those things continue to be provided, because without them, and I absolutely get the political narrative around the front-facing services, particularly those in Sam's area, but let's not kid ourselves that without having those vital support services, the council would not be able to function effectively. That said, we do of course recognise that we have to prioritise front-facing services, and that's what we've looked to do. And the Chief Exec's Department is proposing savings of just over £1 million across a range of areas. But before I talk a little bit more about the savings, I think it's also worthwhile just spending a little bit of time talking about pressures, particularly in those pressures that in the papers are described as council-wide. So the pressures in the Chief Exec's line itself on the table at the top of page, well, the table just in front of paragraph 4.6.3, the 3.8 million, the vast majority of those, or certainly 50% of those, are taken up by what we've just been talking about, what we've talked a bit about this evening in terms of the housing subsidy loss that Alison talked about right at the beginning of her presentation. And that's obviously a significant chunk of the pressures in the Chief Exec's Department. Some of the other notable ones are things like our insurance premium, and also to supplement the resource in the council's projects and change service, where traditionally those employees have been met by temporary funding. And I don't think that's a sustainable solution. And Councillor Kerr made the point about capacity earlier on, and I think that this is a council-wide challenge. Capacity, it is a huge issue facing this organisation in terms of our ability to deliver not just the things that you as politicians and the people of Derby want us to deliver as a local authority, but also the government's aspirations. And of course now we have a combined authority, we have a white paper. They have significant ramifications for this organisation, and so capacity I think is going to be a real challenge well, that's probably worthy of a conversation another time. So the other corporate pressures that are contained in this budget, I guess the most notable one, in addition to the pay award which is in there, and also, of course, again, the national insurance contributions that Councillor Holmes talked about earlier and Alison clarified in terms of that we expect to be funded from government. 9 million of that 12 million are the revenue consequences of the council's capital programme. Or to put it in a more positive light, the significant investment that this council has undertaken over recent years in, particularly in our city centre, but also in obviously facilities like the Moorways Pool or the Moorways Sports Village, more to the point, that comes with a cost. We can't just build those things. And going back to your point earlier, Chair, about fiscal rules, we obviously have a very tight set of fiscal rules around the our prudential borrowing requirements, which Alison, again, as Section 151 officer, has to ensure we adhere to in terms of making sure our borrowing is within certain limits and can be afforded within our revenue account. And even with this significant increase, because a lot of that investment is now obviously coming to the fore, I've already mentioned Moorways. We've obviously got the Beckettwell Arena, which is opening this year. We've got the my apologies, the Market Hall, which is reopening this year. That investment does have a consequence for the council's revenue account, just like a mortgage. You have to pay it back over a period of time. So we've built the revenue consequences of that investment into the council's budget. So that is a significant increase, and I think it's really important that people understand that you know, these things do not come for free. So I think it's worth highlighting that. In terms then of savings, we've increased a budget to recognise an increase in dividends from a company that the council has a share of. And we also, our Clear Channel advertising contract has been really, really successful, and hats off to the team for the work they've done on that, because they've increased the income that we got through the advertising on the Clear Channel contract. And yes, of course, like every other part of the council, we have had to make some difficult decisions about reducing our headcount. And again, like other parts of the council, that has largely come through removing vacant posts. So of the 33 full-time equivalent posts in chief execs, just over 27 of those will come from vacant posts. So we are hoping and expecting that less than 6 posts would come from any form of redundancy. As ever, Chair, happy to take any questions, but I think this is a balanced, sensible set of proposals from the Chief Exec's department, and obviously we've made quite rightly a contribution towards ensuring we've got a balanced budget. Thank you.
Okay, questions for the Chief Exec? Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I've got some specific questions against the the appendix that you sent us. But can I start with just the comment, which hopefully I'll get the same reassurance in terms of the loss of posts and ensuring that the impact of that, particularly on things like customer engagement and corporate management, are not going to be a detriment to either people within the city or elsewhere within the department. Then the specifics are a move to only having reactive repairs in terms of our property, which I find quite worrying, and I think there's a risk to be associated with that. So how are we mitigating that risk? There's a talk about lack of income from commercialisation, and it'd be interesting to know what has been attempted and failed, or whether attempts didn't actually come to fruition in terms of commercialisation. And part of that commercialisation is marketing of empty properties, commercial properties, and whether we're doing that sufficiently. Challenging the coroner's costs, which we are charged for from the county, which we know is having problems of its own. And there's also talk about the cost of living support service, and I'd appreciate knowing more about that.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, Councillor Kerr, and I'll just I'll just cover off that kind of overarching point, Chair, if I may, which is absolutely. I mean, we, as a CLT, we went through this process collectively to identify those posts across the piece in terms of the vacant posts that existed at the time we did the exercise. And each director has gone through a very rigorous process to determine whether or not it was safe and reasonable to remove that vacant post from the establishment to deliver the requisite saving. I mean, the other thing, and it's stating the bleeding obvious, but it's, again, it's important to stress the point. It is far, not only is it easier to remove a vacant post, and obviously less painful for the individual who may have to face redundancy, it is also a cheaper option for the council because we don't have to pay redundancy costs. So that was the premise on which we set about the task to try and remove vacant posts wherever possible. One, to remove the risk of having to put lots of people through a painful redundancy process, but two, to minimise the financial risk to the council. So, and obviously recognising wherever we've done that, we've sought to ensure that the impact on services is minimised as far as possible. But the question you're asking, Lucy, is a perfectly valid one. We all know that the financial challenges facing every single, particularly upper tier local authority in the country, and I've been on a couple of calls today where we are talking about the impacts of the white paper, and every single time there is this question about capacity and the capacity to deliver. So I think it is a challenge, and of course we recognise that challenge. And as I say, it's probably not the right place to be having this conversation, but I'm obviously happy to have it at the appropriate time in the future. But I'll hand over to my colleagues who'll be able to pick up your specific points.
Shall I just pick up a couple then? Yeah. So in relation to the unachieved saving for the commercialisation, that's 47,000. We did have a target of £500,000 in previous iterations that have been delivered. That's the balance that's not been delivered of that one. And then in relation to the welfare reform pressure, that team is currently being funded from reserves. And when the reserves run out, we need to make it have a sustainable footing in terms of a budget, ongoing budget. So that is replacing those reserves when those reserves end.
So I can pick up your questions, specific questions about property, Lucy. Sorry, Councillor Kerr. The move to reactive repairs refers to a £75,000 reduction in the revenue budget for property repairs. This is the second of 2 years of reductions that were agreed, I think 3 years ago. This is a reduction of the overall budget. It's not a move solely to reactive repairs, but our revenue budget for repairs is generally a reactive budget. We do, however, have the around £6.5 million of capital programme related to property repairs, and that continues to deliver planned maintenance across the property estate. While I was looking at the answer to that, did you ask a question about insurance premiums? No? Okay. I wasn't sure whether you did or not. I was going to answer that. It's fine. I'm the person to answer it if you do.
I can pick up on the question around customer engagement resourcing. So the proposed plans protect all the frontline channels, be it face-to-face, be it telephony, or be it specialist accessibility services. There is impact on capacity there, but that capacity is reinforced by the continued successes of the AI enablement and new AI capabilities that will further
both assist colleagues in responding to customer needs, but also offer additional automation options as well. Thank you.
Would you need to come back, Lucy?
Do we have any? Oh, is the marketing of empty properties and the coroner's costs? Have we challenged the county council as hard as we can?
That's me again. Yes, we have. We've done a lot of work with the county council over recent years to document and formalise the relationship in relation to coroner's costs. Both ourselves and the county council are in a fairly difficult position with relation to the coroners. We're required to fund that service, but we have very limited control over the costs of it because the service is determined by the chief coroner, and the conduct of the cases is governed by the coroner, who is not employed by the county council, but is employed by HCTMS. However, the chief coroner is incredibly pragmatic, and we have a very good working relationship with him, and we have done a lot to try and manage costs in this area. However, costs are entirely subject to the number of deaths, where those deaths occur, the complexity of the deaths, and we do have prisons in the county. We have 2 major hospitals, and we do have quite high levels of deaths from both of those areas, which tend to be more complex, and that increases coroner's costs. We've also seen increases in other uncontrollable costs around mortuary costs, autopsy costs, etc. But we do work hard with county and the coroner's service to manage those as best we can.
Okay. A couple of points from myself then, Mr. Simpson. You mentioned the words, you used the words combined authority, and you used the words white paper. Very briefly, I would add that you said those things. They're obviously going to have potentially significant financial effects on Derby City Council. I don't think we quite need to build a wall, do we, around the city, or to keep the super council of the county out. But those things, like you say, probably best discussed elsewhere. But there are other issues in relation to the combined authority funding. I'll give you an example. The shared prosperity funding, of course, which the city dealt with and the district councils dealt with, now combined authority. There's transport funding, there's bus funding, there's a number of funding streams which are transferred to the combined authority. And I think I'm in a fortunate position to be able to keep on top of some developments in the combined authority, along with the leader and the deputy and the members of the cabinet that are involved. But I think there are issues around keeping the city council and the city councillors informed about the work of the combined authority. But if I just touch on those, a couple of those, then the shared prosperity funding, for example, funds some significant partnership work in the city. What's the plan? How are we budgeting for those sorts of effects?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, specifically about the Shared Prosperity Fund, we know that the overall amount of Shared Prosperity Fund has been reduced. That was announced in the budget last year. I think it's only something like 60% of what we've received previously. There's still some work being done by the combined authority to determine how the Shared Prosperity Fund will be distributed. But what we obviously have been pushing hard for is ensuring those priority areas, particularly around things like skills, inward investment, where some of our partners are currently relying on that funding, are protected. And I'm reasonably confident at this juncture that that will be the case. I think the question is going to come as to how we ensure that we focus the areas on where that money is needed most. And obviously, from the Mayor's perspective, that is around, you know, growth and investment. So I think there is, you know, probably that this year is probably going to be a bit of a holding pattern, and then developing further proposals that will determine how Shared Prosperity Fund is distributed going forward, but with absolutely a laser focus on ensuring that it's targeted towards investment and growth. So I think that addresses that. In terms of transport, I guess for me, this is, and Verna may want to comment on this because she's closer to it than I am. But there's no getting away from the fact that this is probably the single biggest change that will come about as a result of the combined authority in terms of the additional investment into transport and public transport. And let's not just have a narrow debate about, well, that's just about buses then, isn't it? And as important as they are, I think Derby has got a significant opportunity here. We're going to be the home of Great British Railway. And therefore, the opportunity to influence how money is spent, not just on buses at a local level, but the wider public transport, particularly around the railways. And as I understand it, the white paper does talk about mayors across the patch, or sorry, across the country, and obviously the government's intentions with the white paper is that every part of England has a combined authority and a mayor. There is, you know, a strong suggestion that mayors will have influence about how money is spent on the railway at a local level. So some big opportunities, and as I say, I think Derby is in a really good place to take advantage of that, given that we will be home of where that, you know, the kind of brains of that will sit. And I'm sure you're aware, Chair, but at the Rail Forum back in the autumn last year, the Mayor actually made an announcement that she would like to see the Transport Authority, if you like, that aspect of the combined authority that will be responsible for transport, to also be based in Derby. So there's, you know, real opportunities for us to have a big say in how public transport is delivered in this part of the world.
I guess to add to that, all of that work is creating resources issues, of course, but it's also the ambition is to deliver it at pace, and so it needs to be carefully done in terms of governance and openness and transparency and explanation to the council and councillors, but the public, to take them along with them as well. So, but there will be significant financial implications that we can't really plan for at the moment in terms of mid-term financial plans, etc., until it develops. So, an interesting sideline to the budget, if you like, in that regard. I don't know whether the leader being in the prime position in relation to this authority at the combined authority. Is there any comments you want to make at this point?
Certainly, Chair. As Paul explained, this year the SPF funding will be more of a carryover, but the board, the EMCA board, agreed to sort of split the responsibility for it, so that some of the SPF funding would come, would still be the responsibility of the authorities, and that some of it would be the responsibility of EMCA, so that they could carry out some strategic distribution of the SPF funding. For example, in business support, I understand that the East Midlands Chamber of Commerce has around 50 different contracts for business support across the region, and that we really felt strongly that that there could be significant savings to the councils if that was more strategically distributed and from one's place, that place being MCA. So those kind of decisions have happened. I think it's important also to point out that the SPF funding was due to end this year, at the end of this financial year, and there was nothing in the former government's budget to replace it. So while it's been described as a reduction compared to previous years, actually it's a bonus amount because it wasn't going to be delivered at all. So while MCA understands what will be put in its place and how that will, whether it would still be called SPF or something else, or how much it will be, this is very much a bit of a holding pattern. But as Paul explained, the inward investment, for example, like pieces like Marketing Derby, have been secured, and actually the funding that they've always required will no longer be coming through SPF, but it will come through the MCA in order to secure its future.
Okay. I was going to mention their name, but we've done it, so over to you, Alison. Is there anything else?
Just a final slide then is on the finance side, before we just pick up on the council plan refresh, is the capital programme. So there's details in the report around the proposed capital programme, which is proposing a £120 million programme for 25-26 and just shy of 240 million over the 3-year period. What I would say around the capital is that a great deal of the capital resources are either committed to existing schemes or is funded through government grants. I suppose the true flexibility comes from either utilising capital receipts or reviewing our levels of borrowing. We have been prudent in terms of the capital programme for next year in terms of levels of borrowing, understanding the impact that has on the revenue budget and the pressures that puts on the revenue budget. So that's just the summary really of the capital programme.
Okay, that was very brief, but I guess the capital programme remains that money that you've got available to replace your washing machine and your car and everything else as well. So it's prudent to be prudent around the capital programme. Where are we in terms of the spend on the capital programme and the levels of spend that's achieved
for current year? Can somebody recall what we had at Q2, what the slippage was?
I mention it because it's one of those subjects that comes up every budget year, and the slippage is larger than probably everybody would want in terms of being able to spend the money that's in the capital programme. So anything we can do to reduce that, the better. Just don't spend it on a new washer, that's fine. Okay, perhaps you can update us on the capital programme spend.
We'll be bringing the Q3, we're getting the Q3 report together, so that'll be coming to scrutiny in Cabinet in the course of the next month or so. So that's probably an ideal opportune time to pick up that bit around the capital programme.
Okay, thank you. I think it's been quite a long meeting, but a useful. Where are going have I missed somebody? This paper here. You always do this, don't you? Why don't you remind me to put you on first? Yes, you can. But were you out? Come on.
Thank you. It's actually more than a couple of items. So the specifics from the capital table on page 37. Why are we paying an extra £100,000 for Castle School? Didn't we specify incorrectly in the first place when we're paying £3 million for it?
Sorry, I misheard that.
We're paying an extra £100,000 for Castle School on top of the agreed sum, and I just wonder why we've not specified it correctly. And again, Abbey Lodge is listed as just over £4.5 million under housing and another £1 million under property. So it's how that sort of listing works. We've got lists of on two different lines referring to refuse vehicles and plant and collection vehicles. And I don't know what the difference is. And I don't know whether the gully wagon that we talked about last year is in either of them. So it'd be interesting to know what the status is of that. What is the IPD Acceleration Development Contingency? And we've got £1 million each going into the Castle Ward Public Square and to Smart Park, and it's interesting to know what projects those are. And then we have the crematorium, which I think is going to go out to consultation, so maybe there'll be more information on that in due course.
Okay, there's quite a lot in that, Lucy. Can I ask you to submit them for some detailed answers? I think Alison was looking to the heavens for people to answer some of the detail there, but there were a couple in there that might be worth just referring to. The gully cleaner and the situation at Stores Road, because it's quite a complicated one. But Simon, do you want to just give us a brief overview of that situation?
Thanks, Chair. So yes, we're currently doing a review.
You didn't mean that, did you, when you said thanks? You'd rather not be doing that at this point, but go on.
It's a bit polite. No, we're currently doing a review of the Stores Road depot. We've got options. We've got a couple of options that we're currently working up and working with colleagues from around the council to do so. We are taking a proposal back to Asset Board this Thursday, the 16th, and then we're taking a report through to CLT on the 21st. And then following that, we will be having some more conversations with union colleagues, staff and members just to really move us forwards. That's correct, Chair. So there's a number of things. We've got space and we've got O licence capacity. So we're only allowed a number of vehicles on our O licence at Stores Road, and we're at capacity and we haven't got the space for additional services and vehicles. So we are bringing food waste service in from 2026 April, as you suggest, which brings in an additional 14 vehicles. And there is some work with MCA, which will look to enhance the highway service, with a number of vehicles and staff coming in for both of those areas. The review of the depot does look at a secondary depot, and it does look at how we can enhance and improve our services and increase them as we need to. And we'll be able to bring a brief on that once we've been through those two processes.
Okay. Alison, any of those that you want to answer now that you've got a number for, or should we submit some answers for Lucy's questions?
Werner?
Sorry, Chair, just specifically on the gully wagon, that isn't included in this because we will be, we know the current gully wagon has been checked by our services in-house, our mechanics, and that will be going back to the provider, and we should have it before the end of this financial year.
I'll respond to the others. I'll need to speak to the service, particularly around the Castle Ward School. We won't have the specifics in finance as to why that's increased.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, so refreshing the council plan. Over to you.
Thank you. I'll be quick. This paper very much sits alongside the budget paper. And I think whilst the budget position remains extremely challenging, as a council we still retain significant ambition for the City of Derby. And really the council plan supports our place-shaping role in delivering against that ambition. So I won't reiterate the kind of the role of the council plan. It is an important document in setting out what we are looking to achieve. Aligning the outcomes that we have alongside those with partners, underpinning our MTFP, and also showing the public the differences that people will see. Now, it's important to say that we do report against the council plan every quarter into both Cabinet and Scrutiny, and we also report as part of our annual reporting process as well. So it is really clear in terms of the differences that people are seeing through that. Our current council plan ends in March. So we have a 3-year council plan, and as part of that we do an annual delivery plan. But it's important that we keep our council plan up to date. Our current council plan is based around 4 main themes. Now, those themes were developed very much with partners. We also have another theme around working smarter. However, what we felt as a CLT and as a cabinet in particular is that actually it's about sort of just perhaps refreshing the language that we have in there, making sure it's up to date. And so as we look towards our next 3-year plan that sits alongside our MTFP, what we're proposing is I guess, as detailed in the paper alongside the budget proposal, but we are looking to change our vision. So we currently have a vision around working with the city for the city. We wanted to move that alongside our kind of place branding that actually we're developing as a city. There is an awful lot of really significant projects that are going to come on stream. And that's both from a physical sense, but also from a community sense. And so it is about building a Derby to be proud of. That is what we are suggesting. We are also proposing to rename what is Resilient City as Inclusive City. Again, that we feel brings out the kind of the people aspects to it and putting people at the heart of everything that we do. We're also proposing just to update the terminology of working smarter. It's about, as a council, being connected to our communities, to our partners, and really, across the region. So again, we feel that is warranted. We're proposing to just generally update all of the areas and focus and outcomes. And also, we are looking to do some engagement with colleagues about the council values. So, in the report, you can see. I was going to say that looks a bit small, but the kind of the latest priority themes, the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, and really those areas of focus that's shown in Appendix 2. Alongside the budget, we are consulting on these. So there is a public consultation that is ongoing up till the 19th of January. We are also, as well as businesses and the sort of statutory consultation that we do, we're consulting with Equality Hub members and also members of our City Partnership Board. Again, really important stakeholders, who we work closely with in terms of delivering the outcomes. Subject to that consultation and obviously the feedback that we will receive, that's for both the council plan and the budget, we will look to develop proposals that will come into February Cabinet and then into full council in due course. So that's really the next steps. That's all I wanted to say. Happy to take any questions.
Questions? Comments? Thoughts? Just from my point of view, looking at the vision, I know it's a very laudable vision. There's some changes of words and a few new things, a lot of old things. And the previous plans were probably as guilty of this as this one appears to be, in terms of they are very laudable plans and thoughts and ideas, but there's not a lot of how you're going to achieve them in there. Is there a plan to populate this with how you're going to do it?
Yep, that's correct. So the areas of focus do give an indication as to how we're going to do it, but it is the annual delivery plan that contains the kind of more detailed actions, measures, and that is what we report into Council Cabinet Scrutiny on a quarterly basis. So we have got that kind of tangible, how and what we'll do.
Okay, I was just thinking it needs some expansion, if you like, on how it is. Okay. Anything else, Alison? No? we've reached the end, and I can go back to my closing speech in thanking you all for your attendance. It's been quite a long meeting, but a useful meeting. I think the devil is still going to be in the detail later on, but I'm sure we'll get through it. Actually, we've come with one recommendation effectively tonight from the committee to Cabinet, but that's probably because most of the Cabinet attended and heard it from us directly, and that was useful. I'd like to think that might be a trend for the future, that where there's a paper that directly affects a Cabinet member, it might be practical or useful to have that Cabinet attend the exec scrutiny meeting to hear and comment on the paper that's being considered. So if you'd think about that, I'd appreciate that. Again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.